Understanding God's plan. This is lesson 3. If you haven't got 1 and 2, you can get it on YouTube or Facebook. We've talked about the creation, God creating man and why He created man. We've been through the process of going through what happened there, all the way through the fall, how man decided. We look at the story and we read about him eating from the tree, and we don't get the significance of it, but basically it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so he and Eve both wanted to decide what was good and evil for themselves, and they didn't need God to make that decision. And when they did that, they kind of messed things up. So anyway, and went through there in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where the fall, and then the 4th chapter with Cain and Abel, and it brings us to the 5th chapter, and we're talking about understanding God's plan. So we're going to start with Genesis 5:1. It says, "These are the family records of the descendants of Adam. On the day that God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. When they were created, He blessed them and called them Adam. Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness according to his image and named him Seth." Okay. Seth. Which son is that of Adam and Eve's? That's the 3rd son. Because the first one was Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel, and Cain was sent in exile, if you will. So he could not be part of it. So the bloodline could not come through Cain, and naturally it couldn't come through Abel because he was dead and buried. How they did burying back then, I have no idea. But so now we're starting back over. It sounds like you're starting in the 1st chapter of the book of Genesis, down about the 26th verse, when it talks about man. It says, on the day that God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. And so we saw that in the 1st and 2nd chapters of the book of Genesis. So we know that God created man, God created him in His likeness, and God gave him authority over this earth. And the way I like to say it, and some people don't like it, but it's just an easier way to say it, God made Adam and Eve God of this world. In other words, He gave this world to them. And so He couldn't just take it back, which leads us to where we're going and what has to transpire since then. And I've said from the beginning, if you want to understand Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, if you want to understand all those, stop before you start reading it and think, what does this have to do with Jesus? Because that's what we're leading up to. The plan of salvation was created before man was ever created. So anyway, that's what it's talking about here. It says Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness according to his image and named him Seth. Then you go down to the 30th verse in this 5th chapter, because I didn't want to follow through all that lineage tonight. It says Lamech lived 595 years after Noah's birth, and he fathered other sons and daughters. You notice it doesn't say how many. We have no idea how many sons and daughters Adam and Eve had. Don't have the foggiest idea of any of these because it doesn't tell us. But it's just trying to follow a lineage, and for a particular purpose, getting to a point that it is part of what God's plan is. So Lamech's life lasted 777 years. Then he died. Noah was 500 years old, and he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he was 500 years old at this particular time. Genesis 5 gives us the genealogical records from Adam and Eve through Noah and his family. Is there a reason why? And if so, what is that reason? Why would God have the writer of Genesis to record these genealogies where it says this one fathered this one after this one after this one after this one? And this is not the last time this occurs. It happened later on, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And also when it talks about Jesus in Matthew, it gives the lineage, and in Luke it gives the lineage up to Jesus. Matthew starts with Abraham and Luke starts with Adam. So it has the lineage. So why would it be important to give us this lineage from Adam to Noah? Pardon me? Well, it gives more credence. That's one thing, but there's another thing. What covenant relationship and what bloodline is Noah under? Adam and Eve. Okay? Who was given this earth? Adam and Eve. So by inheritance, if you will, is carrying us through to let us know this is not another created man that God created somewhere else and made another one and put him on this earth. This is the one that's under the same curse, if you will, that Adam and Eve is under, and under the same authority that Adam and Eve was under, where it told them to take dominion and have authority. And you'll see that in just a minute when he talks to him. So there's a reason. There has to be a connection between Adam and Noah in order for Noah to do what he's about to do, and then passing through there down to the next generations in order to get us to Jesus. So it's important that he's tied to Adam. If not, it could just come up and start, there was a man named Noah. Wouldn't tell us where he came from, but it gives us the genealogical record so we know that this is the man, this is the same creation that was back with Adam and Eve. So yes, there's a reason. And the reason, you go back to Genesis 1:28, it says, God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and every creature that crawls on the earth. Who was this spoken to? Who was God talking to? Adam and Eve. He was talking to Adam and Eve. And he told them, read this again, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. He said, rule the fish of the sea. He didn't say, I sent you down here, you're going to take care of this for a while, and then I'm going to come back, or any of that. He just said, you rule over all this. You're the ruler over all this. Everything here has to answer to you. It falls under your authority. No. Genesis 9:1, going forward a little bit, God blessed Noah and his sons, and listen to what he said. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Does this sound familiar? He said, the fear and terror of you will be in every living creature on the earth, every bird of the sky, every creature that crawls on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. They are placed under your authority. He's saying everything is under your authority. In other words, he's just repeating the same covenant that he did with Adam and Eve in the very beginning. That they're under your authority, they're under your rule. And many times, and this is Randy's summation here, if you will, people ask, why is it that God just didn't wipe out Adam and Eve and make another man, another woman, and so on? He had given this earth to man. Once God does something, he doesn't change his mind and take it back. If he'd have done that, he'd have been, God, don't take this too far. God would have been a thief. Wouldn't he? Because he gave this to Adam and Eve and he says, you didn't do well with it, so I'm taking it back. He never gave that. He never said in there, now if you goof up, I'm going to take it back. He gave, you take authority, you have dominion, this is, you are to rule over. And then he says the same thing to Noah and to his family. So Noah had the same relationship with this earth that Adam and Eve did. He was made out of this earth. He was created here, but he was a descendant of Adam and Eve. So just like the height that I am, my build, things about me are related to my inheritance from my mother and father, who was from their mothers and fathers right on back. So I inherited these things from them, just like Noah and his family inherited these things from Adam and Eve. What we also inherited from our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents, all that, is a flesh and blood body that's temporary and will not last forever. It kind of wears down after time. I know we haven't noticed that, but some people have. It says genealogies do have a purpose, and that purpose is to connect the previous generations to what is being talked about now. Because they had to have these genealogies to get us to where Noah is. And then we get to the question, why did God save Noah and his family? And I'm going to read the scripture for that. Genesis 6:1. When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, my spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. Now, what is he talking about here? This little short segment of Scripture has created more theories and more ideas, and people always trying to, I've said this a lot, and I hope you don't forget it. We should spend more time reading what the Bible said instead of surmising what it didn't say. And so because of that, people are looking at, well, what this really means. And someone says the sons of God. Well, that's obviously that's angels, and that's fallen angels. That's the fallen angels that came down here, and they mated with, they took the daughters of mankind, and they had these, because it follows after these. It talks about giants in the land and so on. And it said, and it became this superhuman race called the Nephilim. And I'm thinking, where do you get this stuff? Where do you come up with this? And in the Bible, nowhere. Now, I'm not making, because I don't know, and nobody else does either. But nowhere in the Bible that I know of, other than maybe Job, where it talks of angels as being sons of God. But yet this is saying fallen angels are the sons of God, and these fallen angels are the ones. If you want, I'm going to give you my opinion for all it's worth here, okay? My opinion is what he's talking about here. You have what two sons of Adam and Eve that are most likely still alive at this point, before this ever came about? At when Seth was born, which son was still alive? Cain. And it follows through Cain's lineage until what came from him, and it tells Seth. To me, Seth is the one under God's covenant, because Cain broke that in what he did. So Seth would be, his descendants would be the sons of God, and the daughters, would be the sons of God, and the daughters of men would be of Cain's line, and they came together. Well, that shouldn't have been. That shouldn't have happened. It should have stayed where they were. But anyway, that's just my opinion. It's not talking about angels or anything of the supernatural like that. It's one lineage with another lineage. Because, another reason is because they talked about angels, and Jesus said in heaven there's no marrying or given in marriage. In other words, are angels male or are they female? And the answer is they're angels. Is God male or is God female? He said he made male and female in his image, both of them. So if he made both of them, then anyway, people can carry that too far. But anyway, that's an idea of where you go. Wherever you want to go with that, it's fine. But read what it says first. And then it says, he says, because they are corrupt, it says their days will be 120 years. And I've heard many people talk about what this is, but if you do the math of Noah when this was happening and the math of when Noah got on the boat, it was about 100 years later. And so what I think God is saying here, and this is Randy's opinion, is what God is saying here is, I'm going to give them 120 days or 120 years to straighten up. That's the way I'd say it. And after that, we're going to take care of matters in a different way. And there's a reason that he had to, as far as I'm concerned. It has to do with who Adam and Eve were and who Noah was. Well, people try to use that as being years that a man will live. I don't think that's what it's saying. I think what it's saying is that from this point on, there's 120 years until something's going to happen, and we know what that was because we know it's the flood. That's Randy's opinion. It doesn't say it there, so I'm going to tell you it's my opinion. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with the years that man... And people I've heard people use that and quote that. It said, they quote the scripture that says, man's days shall be, basically 70 years or 80 years if he really does well. And then it says, but his days will be 120 years. So it says man can live to be up to 120 years old. Well, I don't think any of that's talking about that at all. So it's just, you're kind of taking it out of context. So I don't think it has to do with, it says their days will be 100. He says there. Does that mean everybody's going to live to be 120 years old? No. He says there. He's talking about overall. Their days going to be 120 years before something happens. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw that the man's, now listen, look at what I've underlined here. Man's wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every scheme his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time. Well, we have a lot more righteous people today than they had then. He could only find Noah and his family out of the whole earth that was worth taking care of. So he said, every scheme his mind thought of was nothing but evil. All that. It's like when people say, they say, if God doesn't judge the United States, then he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. First place, how many righteous people were there in Sodom and Gomorrah? What did Abraham finally, he started out with, what if there's 50? And what if there's 30? And he got down to 10. They couldn't find 10 in those two cities that had grown together. And now, can you imagine if just in Jacksonville you didn't have but 10 people that weren't robbers and thieves and dirtbags? Can you imagine what it'd be like trying to live? So we haven't seen anything like what was back here. But anyway, 6th verse. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Then the Lord said, I will wipe off from the face of the earth mankind, whom I created, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. Noah, however, found favor in the sight of the Lord. It says, Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. And now I want you to think about it. Don't answer this question yet, but think about it. What would have happened if God had wiped all of mankind out at that time? What state was man in at that point? He was in a fallen state. What if he had destroyed all of mankind, including Noah and his family, and man was in a fallen state? Okay, just think about that question. Verse 9. These are the family records of Noah. See, we've already been through the others. Now we're getting Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with God, and Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Do you think Noah was perfect? What did it say? It said Noah was a righteous man. What does righteous man mean? He's in right standing with God. He's a righteous man. Okay, he's righteous. But look what it says, the following line. Blameless among his contemporaries. You know how you could say this as far as I'm concerned? Compared to everybody else, he was a saint. That would be another way to put that. And he said among his contemporaries, in other words, he was somebody that God could work with to save mankind. Okay, it had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. What would have happened to Adam and Eve and all who followed if God had wiped out all of mankind at the time of Noah? Jesus had, what's the only way to God? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Well, he hadn't gotten here yet. So what would have happened with Adam and Eve and Lamech and all of them? That's a good question, isn't it? But you see the effects that man was having on this world that God had created. In Genesis, it says, man's wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every scheme, now think about that, every scheme of his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time. Can you imagine if you think all the time, every waking hour is nothing? I think I know some people like that. But they're always looking for some way to, anyway, we won't get too carried away there. Get on past here. Redemption comes through Jesus, and this is what I just said. No man comes to the Father but by me. So now think about this. Now this is going to be a little bit, you have to twist your brain a little bit because we're human beings in flesh and blood. For Adam and Eve to be saved, we'll use the term that we use as Christians, to be saved, it would take Jesus. Well, Jesus was many centuries later, thousands of years later. How could God use Jesus down here to save people who had died back here? Now, don't answer the question, just think about it. But what would have been the destiny of Adam and Eve, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and all? What would have been their destiny if they'd all been wiped out? Just keep that up, because there'd be no remaining seed of man on earth. There would be no man, there'd be no seed for Jesus to come through. Jesus had to come through the seed of man in order for him to redeem man. Genesis 9:1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The fear and terror of you will be in every living creature on the earth, every bird of the sky, every creature that crawls on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. They are placed under your authority. In essence, mankind was saved from eternal disorder by drowning. God saved them by drowning them. You say, that sounds... Well, all these wicked people that's on earth, what chance would they have had of salvation if they'd have continued? What would have happened, considering you see from the time of Seth until the time of Noah, all of mankind except for Noah and his family were so bad, all they were thinking about was evil all the time. How long do you think mankind would have existed, period? They would have been killing each other. Disease would have been growing rampant. They wouldn't have come up with the cures to diseases that we had. And, well, for instance, HIV, AIDS. When was the first time you heard of that? It didn't exist until the 20th century. How about COVID-19? It didn't exist just a few years ago. It didn't exist because the way of this world is always headed towards destruction. In other words, you'll get more and more diseases. If it hadn't been for modern medicine, Diana and myself both would have been dead several times. Cancer, heart attack. She had cancer. She had emergency hysterectomy. She had in a car accident where her lung was punctured, her liver was punctured, had broken several ribs, broke her pelvis bone in 7 places, I think it was. I mean, without medical care, she'd have been dead. So we would have been dead if it hadn't been for the care of, in other words, if there hadn't been something to interfere with it, we'd both been dead way before now. Well, I'm tickled that didn't happen. So in that respect, now that's hard to see it that way, but God saved man from eternal disorder in drowning them. By drowning them, but he saved out a seed. Genesis 11:1. Now this is after Noah, this is after the flood, after he saved them and they've come back, and I'm not going to get into detail about all the things that happened with Noah, but we could see that Noah was not first thing he did when he got him some grapes far enough along he could, he made him some wine and got drunk. So he wasn't just a sterling character, so there was still the seed of Adam in him. Genesis 11:1. So it gets us past there. And the 10th chapter has to do with genealogy again, the last part of the 9th chapter and 10th chapter. As at one time the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. Okay? As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, now listen carefully, come let us make oven-fired bricks. They used brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. The Hebrew word there, I think in King James it says slime. It could be asphalt, could be any number of things similar to that they use for the mortar. But anyway, and they said, come let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we'll be scattered over the face of the earth. Now think about what it said there. What was wrong with this proposal? What was wrong with what they did? Why was it wrong for them to settle all here together and build a city for themselves and a tower in the middle of the city? What was wrong with that? Why was that a bad thing? 11:5. Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that men were building. Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower. I'm repeating the same line. That the men were building. The Lord said, if they have begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible to them. Now, here's the problem. It's in the second part of this fourth verse. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the earth. Who were they depending on to build this great city and build this great tower? Themselves. They said, let's make, they didn't say, let's make a tower, let's make a city, that in this city we can worship the God of all creation. They didn't say, let's go to God and pray to Him about this deal and decide what we need to do. They said, let's make a name for ourselves. Isn't that where we still get in trouble today? Let's make a name for ourselves. We don't need God. I mean, after all, we can handle this ourselves because we can all do it together and we don't be scattered all over the earth. So they were depending on themselves for this enterprise, for this. You know, when I was a kid growing up and for many years, I would see this and it would say that God was mad at them because they built this tower and they were so stupid back then. They thought they were going to build a tower that was high enough where it could reach up to heaven where God was. And I remember Sunday school teachers telling me that. And then I read what it says. And what did it say here? He says, a city and a tower. It didn't say just a tower. Well, I'm going to tell you something about construction, if you don't know this. The tallest structure in the ancient world was probably 500 and some feet high. They couldn't get any higher than that. And there was a reason. And the tallest structure are the pyramids. Okay, how are they shaped? Like this. What if they'd have tried to build straight up 500 feet? It would have fallen over. What made it so they can build skyscrapers that are 2,000 feet high? Steel skeleton. Until then, there were no buildings built that high because they couldn't build them that high. Just the weight of the brick itself would collapse. There's no way in the world they could do it. I don't care what they built it out of. They couldn't get it but just so high until that framework. So to think that these people were so stupid that they thought that they could build a tower to reach all the way up to where God was in heaven, I don't think they were that dumb. They were dumb enough not to look to God and decide they're going to make a name for themselves. So the problem with that was that they weren't looking to God. So why would God want to separate these people? Why wouldn't He want them to stay speaking the same language? Why would He do what He's about to do? Now, I've written down a few things here. God needed to find a man who He could trust with His covenant. Okay? He needed a man with whom He could renew the covenant and save all of mankind, not just some. If all of mankind were evil all the time, they would eventually bring destruction to themselves. That's what would happen. They would cease to exist. The man that God had created would be lost along with all of his family. So why is that important? So I want to talk about the birthright for just a minute. Birthright, Merriam-Webster says, a right, privilege, or possession to which a person is entitled by birth. So you are entitled to certain things by birth. We just saw they got a new king in England because the Queen died. Why did Charles become king? Was it because he deserved it? Was it because he was so qualified? Was it because he was so smart? Was it because he was so tall? Was it because he was so handsome? It was because he was the son of the Queen and he was first in line for the throne. He didn't have to do anything except stay living in order to become a king. He couldn't become queen. I don't think we haven't got that bad off yet. What have we inherited from Adam and Eve? And I got the answer down there. Hardship, decay, and death. That's what we inherited from Adam and Eve. Does that make you feel good? I thought I'd cheer everybody up tonight and let you know that's what we inherited from Adam and Eve. What was Adam and Eve's birthright before they decided that they could be their own God? What was their birthright? They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. It says all the earth and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created man in His own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. So Adam and Eve both were made in the image of God. Okay. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth." That was their birthright. What did they do with their birthright? Our birthrights as descendants of Adam lead to death and destruction. If our birthright was descended from God, then we would have life eternal. That's a big difference. God needed a covenant man and his descendants to carry on the birthright until the time that He could bring Jesus into this world. Now, you got one group of people that are all joined together in the land of Shinar. They said, "Let's make a name for ourselves." They were leaving God out. They were building this city and they were building this tower. They were leaving God out. So what would have happened to them eventually? It led to destruction. So what did God do? What did God do to take care of this? They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." In essence, they were saying that they wanted to be their own God, just like Adam and Eve had. They inherited that from Adam and Eve, and they were carrying right on with Adam and Eve. Now, so what's the... Now, part of this is going to be getting into my opinion, and my opinion is the best one that I have. So that's the one I'm going to share with you. If He'd left them all of one language, one mind, and all together, the destiny was destruction. But if you confuse their languages and you divide them up, people are going to they started gathering up with each other. They could speak this language with, and this group would get off and move over here, and this one off over here. And what do we have? Say there was 20 different groups. Now you've got these groups in different places. So if this one starts heading down a bad place, they're not going to infect everybody else. If this one does, they're not going to infect everybody. In other words, the chances of finding somebody to carry on the birthright is greater because you have them separated and you have different families and groups of people. And you can see what happened with that. Genesis 11:10, I'm getting close to the end of this. These are the family records of Shem. Remember Shem? Shem lived 100 years and fathered Arphaxad. That's Arphaxad. That's the closest I can do. 2 years after the flood, and then we skip down through more genealogies. I didn't think you want to read them all. Let's get down to 27, the last part. It says, Terah fathered Abram. Who did Abram become? Abraham. Okay. Terah fathered Abram. Verse 31. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, Haran's wife. Haran was his brother. And his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son's wife, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. He said they set out to go. Now this is an opinion that I think this might be part of the case, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute. It says they left Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. It says, but when they came to Haran, they settled there. Now I've got you a map. Here's Ur of the Chaldees, down about where Iraq is now. Okay? And over here is where they were going. Now you can see why they traveled here, because they traveled along the Euphrates River, because water would be a handy thing to have while you're traveling. And they couldn't go down to the 7-Eleven and pick up a few cases of water and load it on their camels and carry it with them. So they had to be close to water. So they traveled along here, but it said, but when they got to Haran, they stopped there. This is just a guess, a pure guess of mine. I think that God might have spoken to Terah and said, Terah, I want you to take your family and I want you to go to the land of Canaan. Well, Terah was traveling up here. We got to Haran. He traveled all he wanted to travel. He quit there, and that's where he died. He died in Haran. And we know that Abram and Sarai and Lot all wound up traveling on to the land of Canaan. So it's just my opinion that they got it because it said in the scripture before. It's not that I'm making this up. It says it. Said right here, and to set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. To go to the land of Canaan is where they were going. And he didn't quite make it. He made it to Haran. Did his health give out? Did his will give out? Did what? We don't know. It doesn't tell us, so you can surmise all you want to, but all we know it says that's where they stopped. And that brings us to Abram. Genealogy in the 5th takes us, chapter 5 takes us from Adam to Shem. Chapter 11 takes us from Shem to Abram. Now remember why I said that you had to have the genealogy tying Noah and Shem to Adam and Eve is to show that they were rightful owners of this planet. And then you're taking you from the 11th chapter from Shem down to Abram. And so Abram is tied in the same relationship with Adam and Eve. He's tied all the way back. So he has the same authority on this land that Adam and Eve had. And that's who God used. And that's where we're going to take up the next time. So do you have any questions?